I've been invited to sort of restage a piece of work I made in 2008 for Nicola Burio in the Tate Triennial. It was titled Ultra Modern, and my piece was called Palak, and it took the sort of, I tried to recreate the Palace of Culture within the Tate Britain, and then upon that I conducted a facelift as though executed by Will Alsop, one of the sort of then favourite architects of under Tony Blair and New Labour. Yeah, so really drawing analogies, finding comparisons between these. So you've got this sort of, allegedly this sort of social democracy, you know, the sort of freedom sort of afforded by sort of capitalism and sort of globalization, rubbing against the oppressive regime of Stalin's Soviet socialist realism. And so it actually derived from an Andrew Brighton essay called Managerial State when I started thinking about this, when he drew a comparison between Tony Blair's government, the way they sort of used artists to sort of propagate, and I'm repeating myself, but art as a social cultural tool and artists as instrumentalists. And so I was trying to sort of make the point that when you peel away all the sort of day glow colours and the soft rounded corners, and actually we're left with a similarly oppressive sort of remit or agenda. And it was playing with ideas at that time that Burio was addressing in his manifesto about ultramodernism and the artist as this, I think he referred to it as homo viator, this deterritorialized sort of agent that could sort of travel around the globe regardless of sort of locale or geography or fixed position. And I was sort of trying to challenge that really, because I sort of think it's quite important to sort of address the context within which you make the work. And but then having been invited to bring it to Warsaw, I'm sort of naturally rethinking the work and trying to sort of update it, bring it up to speed with some of my sort of concerns now, and just enjoy sort of, you know, reconfiguring it. Yeah, you sort of hope there's some sort of mileage or longevity with all your works that you make, that they're not just sort of timepieces, and I'm sort of relieved to say that I think it still has some relevance. And I've come here again, you know, a few times since I made that work, and I've been sort of observing from afar and meeting other Polish artists on the sort of international scene, and I think some of the points I was making then are still relevant today. I think the sort of underlying sort of idea that's more relevant to this incarnation or iteration is this idea of the sort of westernization, Americanization of sort of, you know, the art world. And I think it's come up today in conversations that there seems to be a tendency, I gather, in Polish art to sort of veer more towards the international sort of international sort of exchange or discourse rather than something steeped in. And so I think I'm actually taking a slightly more sort of wary approach to that, trying to see what happens when we try and sort of universalize or homogenize this aesthetic and make a museum look like a museum that could be anywhere else in the world and any of the other continents, certainly the West. Yeah, I think perhaps in a different sense, like my work sort of, my approach has always been to sort of look at that which surrounds me in the everyday, and I've always sort of tried to find the poetry within that, and I sort of don't need to go back into sort of history or anywhere else into sort of science fiction. You know, I'm very much into the sort of here and now, but then I don't think it has that same sort of perhaps patriotic sort of texture. There's not so much pride in mine, or it's not the sort of cool Britannia. It's not. That certainly hasn't been my intention. It's just really by default that I can only really refer to that which surrounds me. So perhaps there is that sort of you know, I have continued in that way, but that's purely just because I've been making most of my work in the UK. Those patriotic or nationalistic tendencies with shame, and trying to sort of figure out where that's taking us and what the sort of outcome of this might be. And so it's hopefully in a more sort of objective, critical capacity, rather than a sort of, revering or celebrating our wonderful monarchy. But then that said, so when I'm travelling elsewhere to make work, I try and acknowledge the sort of circumstances within which this will be made. So coming to Poland, I've made a piece at the Mirror Foundation in Barcelona last year, so the work was entirely conceived and executed in Barcelona. If I do a show even just up in Glasgow in Scotland, then I'll make the work about that locale. And so coming here, it's been really important, although I'm bringing my sort of Western sort of uncertainties with me and my curiosities about the sort of the issues we just addressed. I'm also trying to acknowledge the sort of history of Warsaw, and so for the piece that perhaps we should talk about that, the piece I'm working on here is trying to sort of confront some of the very sensitive issues around the sort of socialist realist public sculptures that I gather people are quite keen to try and sort of push aside, almost erase. And so I'm trying to sort of drag those out and sort of examine those. So working with the collection of Karol Torek, sort of juxtaposed or sort of combined with some of these Western traits I talked about.
Yeah.